Welcome to Rising Tide Startups, where today's most exciting solopreneurs share their startup stories. They also deliver tangible strategies that they would implement personally if starting their business over today. Each episode is a startup masterclass. Make sure you take notes. Take it away, Kevin.
This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my guest today is Olivia Molesworth. Olivia, thank you for joining us on Rising Tide.
Thanks so much for having me.
She is chatting from Oxford, England, as we speak, an Australian that has headed to the Northern Hemisphere.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit.
Cold.
And it's cold. It's exactly right. It's very cold. So tell us a little bit about Olivia.
Yeah, okay. So I've lived in Melbourne, Australia my whole life. I did my undergrad at the University of Melbourne doing a Bachelor of Commerce, majored in accounting and finance. From there, I started working at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I worked there for several years in the international tax and transactions team, which gave me a really fantastic financial services foundation. And while I really enjoyed my time at PwC, I decided that advisory wasn't the right fit for me. I'd always had entrepreneurial interests, so I got involved in the startup space and worked at 3 different e-commerce startups there. And it was that journey which eventually led to me starting my own financing company. So I started that a couple of years ago, and then as of almost 6 months ago now, I've been living in the UK. So doing my MBA, my Masters of Business Administration at Oxford University, which is where I am now. Hence the dorm room vibes behind me. But yeah, that's where I've been the last 6 months, and yeah, really, really enjoying it.
So the company that you founded is called Bromleigh Capital. When did you found that?
That was born in 2018.
Okay. So walk us through kind of that transitional phase. You said you were working with some other startups, early stage startups, and then all of a sudden you said, okay, I want to launch out on my own. Was it kind of born out of the experience of those startups and seeing kind of gaps or pain points?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was. Naturally, I am very, very risk averse. So if you had told me that I was going to start my own thing at 22, I would never have believed you. I'm like, absolutely no way. So it was 100% my experience working in the startup space. So I worked in sort of several sort of strategic operational roles, and that's sort of where I quickly identified a real desperate need for affordable and sustainable debt funding for small businesses. I found that so many young businesses that I interacted with really struggled to reach their growth potential due to an inability to access affordable capital. So I guess I realized that there wasn't really a lack of entrepreneurial zeal, but rather a lack of entrepreneurial finance.
Mm.
So that's sort of when I started some fairly extensive market and regulatory research and began to understand the sort of it sounds a bit aggressive, but sort of the predatory lending behavior, which was
Sure.
being exhibited by the banks and the online lenders, which was just commonplace in the market. As a result of many prudential changes and the Banking Royal Commission in Australia, which was in 2017, the many large Australian banks had significantly reduced small business lending, and it was just increasingly difficult for small businesses to access traditional funding without extensive physical collateral. This vacuum was sort of being filled by the emergence of all these online fintech lenders, which were operating in rather sort of unethical ways. They had really opaque structures and pricing. And so I sort of discovered after working in the space for a couple of years that young businesses just really needed simple, ethical products which they could apply for and receive almost instantaneous turnaround. So as a result of all of that, Bromley was born in 2018, and yeah, we're pretty dedicated to, not pretty dedicated, fully dedicated to ethical lending and serving impact businesses, which is what we do.
I want to circle back up with that on that tagline in just a minute, but the question that comes before that, I mean, so many startups are like, bootstrapped.
Mm-hmm.
A finance company, that's very difficult to bootstrap a finance company because you almost need capital from the very beginning. So
Absolutely.
how did you, kind of create that back office for yourself? I mean, did you raise capital for this early, and how difficult was that?
Oh, very. I mean, I think raising capital in any industry, any sector, whatever small business you're doing is always really tricky. It's, it's the worst thing about starting a business. Everyone hates it. And it's, it's an ongoing struggle for a long, long time. You always seem to be needing to raise more capital. But obviously, yes, in this industry, I did need a significant amount of capital before I even got off the ground. And yes, that was definitely a struggle. It was made easier because I'd spent quite a bit of time in the startup space prior to starting. So I had some really great connections within the VC space. And basically, when we began, it was just all private investment, essentially a bunch of private investment, angel investors, that kind of thing, to get us off the ground. And from there, it's just we sort of scaled from there. But yes, it's always that thing which sort of makes every entrepreneur worry capital raising, and it's forever something which is a difficulty. But yes, it was definitely something which I had to overcome right straight away.
So the business model itself. So if I'm wanting to invest capital in your company from the very beginning, did you approach me as a VC or as an angel investor and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to, the flat rate's going to be 10% on our loans. I mean, just as an example.
Yep.
I get 6%, you get 4%. I mean, is there a return on that? Is that what they were looking for? Because I mean, money is available. It's just very difficult to earn a good rate of return right now, in the markets. So is that kind of I mean, that's a simplified version, obviously, but is that kind of the approach you took with trying to raise capital?
Yeah, kind of. So yeah, that was sort of I guess the opening liner. These are the figures, these are the returns. But I guess the distinguishing factor would be our business model and how we operate compared to relative to other fintech lenders. So, for example, we adopt relative to other lenders quite a conservative approach in terms of credit risk assessment. So, basically, other fintechs on the market operate this sort of high interest rate, high turnover model, where they will increase the interest rate charge based on how they assess the risk, how high risk that particular client would be. Whereas we sort of flipped it around saying, like, this is the risk profile which we will accept. Like, that is it. We don't charge additional rates just because we think you're riskier. Either you fit the risk profile or you don't. And a lot of the time, yeah, like fintechs they'll charge additional interest because they think it's a risky client and extend the loan, which in my opinion is unethical behavior, because most of the time it ends up just being, the business doesn't have the capacity to serve the loan long term, and it ends up just being a financial burden and just increasing liabilities for the business rather than giving it legs to grow and expand. So hence why I think it's sort of unethical. So I guess when approaching investors, we sort of said, like, this is what's currently happening in the market, and like these are the massive default rates which so many fintechs are experiencing. This is how we're going to go about credit risk assessment. It's like way more accurate and way more conservative. And again, how we assess risk is quite different as well. So one big problem which so many young businesses have, especially sort of with traditional funding, is the financial requirements that many lenders need when applying for a loan. So many young businesses, they don't have 3 years worth of lodged company tax returns. And so they just can't really even get off the ground to begin with. So we've developed technology where we utilize like real-time platform trading data and incorporate that into our risk assessment to basically determine whether we think they will have the cash flow to service the loan. And so that's just a really it's a very effective way to assess credit risk, and it really just sort of opens the doors to so many businesses that otherwise wouldn't really be able to get in the door. So I guess, when we're approaching, back to the original question, when talking to VCs, it's a combination of like, I basically said, like, I know from the outset, it looks like these products can't really be differentiated. But in actual fact, how we assess risk, how we assess credit risk and ability to service a loan, and our assessment and attitudes towards risk profile are actually very, very different to so many other credit providers. And as a result, we have very, very, very low default rate. We have a really high customer return rate. because we sort of go for more sort of longer term relationships as opposed to this sort of high turnover, high churn model. So, and then obviously there was the other whole factor of just the ethics behind it as well. I found that when I was exploring the idea of Bromley, it was pretty apparent that there was real investor interest to gain exposure to classes of ethical investment, and Bromley could offer a unique conduit for investors to fulfill their social investment goals in that respect. And I think that's something which there's been a lot of development for that in the equity space in Australia, but not so much for debt funding.
Right.
So that was that. So it's kind of, again, sort of, laying out the stats, but then also, the impact side of the ethics side of things, which I think is definitely something which is on investors' minds at the moment.
You know, I mentioned off camera that you're going to say some things that are going to generate, these interesting follow-up questions. I have about 50 follow-up questions. I'm trying to weed through which one do I want to really ask you. But so when you're looking at, you have kind of a pretty narrow profile of who maybe the ideal, client might be. I mean, based on credit history, based on potential, based on the individual itself. I mean, that to me is it. When you're looking at, if you don't have a 3-year, say, tax record or whatever, so are you looking more industry specific, like depending on what industry they're in, you have that data, or how are you assessing them, from a pool of data versus just the individual itself?
So I guess initially, in terms of do we focus on particular sectors and industries, the initial answer is no. There are so many calls that I have from potential clients who they'll sort of give me their business in one sentence and be like, is it possible? Is it possible? And my answer is we never say no from the outset. Like, we will always have an open discussion with everyone. So we have clients from almost every industry and sector there are. But in terms of credit and risk assessment, e-commerce obviously is a really booming industry in Australia, and again, particularly off the back of COVID as well. And that's where there's real opportunity to come up with develop innovative technology to create these risk assessment tools. So it's things like Shopify platforms, so that kind of thing, which you can create these really cool APIs technologies that work into your credit risk assessment. So I guess the trading data and like the trends and their volume sales, all that kind of stuff, that plays a big factor into it. But then the other thing is when we're thinking about small businesses and young startups and it comes to credit assessment, I think it's really important to kind of think outside the box a bit, because and to be a little bit innovative and creative. And I have to say, there is no one case that is the same as the next. Like in the startup space, small businesses, it's not just a rolling procedure that you can do the same credit risk assessment, ask the same questions every time.
Right.
It's just not how it works. It's like startups are just so unique and they each have their own unique problems. So every case is 100% different. And we said right from the start that we wanted a really holistic model and approach when assessing risk. So yes, obviously the data is super important. And that's where, our API technology and that kind of stuff comes into play. But we have really personal conversations with every single one of our clients. And that's a really, really important aspect of it. Because I think a lot of yes, we provide the main, obviously the flagship product is financial services and loans, but there's surrounding that, there's a whole lot of business solution sort of problems behind that. Like it's very the operational side of things is very interlinked. So just really getting to know the business owners and their visions for the company, I think is a really, really important aspect as well, which I definitely underrated before I started the company. I was kind of, I had really extensive credit. This is going to be what we're going to do. Step 1, 2, 3. These are the questions. These are the data we need. These are the stats we're going to look at. But then, you have all that, and there's this whole sort of personal side of things, personal side, which just plays such a huge role.
I mean, it would be very difficult to get the PwC side out of your head too. I mean, you have a history there. I would almost see you reverting back to that as you're sitting down and talking to people and kind of advising them through the process. So you kind of have a business coach ideology. You kind of have we're the financer, we're just kind of your encourager, because we want you to succeed too.
Yes,
we want whatever you're doing to work, because I
You
can,
get invested.
we all lose. If you fail, we all lose. So walk us through the idea behind just the word. You used it a couple of times, the word ethical. Are you talking about your business practices? Are you talking about the ethics of the companies that you invest in, or is it a combination of all the above?
Yeah, both. So very much two-sided. I guess initially going into the business, it was like we were really, really focused on our practices and how we ran our business. And there are times where I sort of felt like I was being too big for my shoes almost, because we were, before things were even up and running, I was saying things to myself like, well, no, this doesn't coincide with the values of the company, like this non-existent company which wasn't even running at the time. But I think because I had had so much interaction with unethical lending, working in a startup space, I was just super, super insistent that everything, all of our practices were really consistent with our ethical mandate, which was just like 100% transparency. And yeah, 100% transparency, and making everything as simplistic and approachable and accessible as possible. And it's a real challenge in the financial services industry because it's a whole lot of words and jargon that people don't understand and people don't really want to deal with. Like, no one likes looking through a contract. So that's actually a good example. Our loan contract is something that we spent a lot of time on because I wanted it to be as simple and readable as possible. I wanted it to be as like brief as possible, but obviously comprehensive and protective and yada yada. But so I wanted it to be I wanted there to be a huge element of clarity to it, because I just had so many horror stories of small businesses that you would find themselves one day realizing that, oh my gosh, for the last 4 months, I've been paying daily late fees and I didn't even know about it because it was somehow hidden in these
Right.
contract terms, which I didn't even know were there. And the thing is, like, these fintech lenders, I don't want to be all like, I hate fintech lenders, because they have done amazing things through the industry. They've really disrupted it. They've provided these amazing sort of automated processes, really streamlined. They are really focused on the sort of user experience, instantaneous funds, all that kind of stuff, which is completely, disrupted, upended the whole business lending industry, which is great. But at the same time, because so many businesses are just, they are desperate for working capital a lot of the time, they get themselves into these contracts where they just really don't know a lot of the time what's going on. And yeah, it's quite horrifying sometimes. Like, I've had several cases where clients have come to me with existing loan contracts that they have, and I've said, look, I'm not going to give you a loan because you're way far too extended, but you need to go to ASIC because this is breaking unfair contract terms. Like, here are your
Right.
contracts. We'll
Right.
help you. This is bad. So I guess it was that experience which made me like really, really insistent on our ethical processes and just making everything super, super, super transparent in that regard. And yeah, again, the clarity and the accessibility of it all. And then sort of once we started practicing and running, I think it was just the personal interaction that I had with the clients, and just learning more about these amazing small businesses and how people were just really, taking a crack and trying to do really good things in the space. So that was kind of when we launched our Impact Businesses program, where we try to financially reward impact businesses. And that's purposely quite a broad definition, because we want to open it up to as many businesses as possible, but it's pretty much, if your business has some sort of meaningful impact, social impact, or if you're using the funds for some sort of social impact, like if you need funds to purchase solar panels or something, for example, or if you're running some, I don't know, like recycling. One of our clients recycles food waste and turns it into baby food products, like really, really cool stuff. If you're doing either of these things, we try to financially reward those companies with discounted interest rates. So that was kind of how we went about it. That was the model that we decided to take. So yes, I guess the answer to your question, again, I've gone on a total tangent. Yes, ethics is very, very important on both sides. But going into the business, that was my obsession, was our practices and our operations and how we are perceived.
That's a great segue into the next question I had. That, as you were talking, I'm thinking about, you said, hey, I'm not trying to hate on all the fintech, startups out there. They
Yeah.
it's interesting because they probably have, navigated that proverbial minefield of, going through the regulation, the regulatory agencies, and just opening up. It's almost like Uber. They've disrupted
Yeah.
the industry enough, and
Mm.
caused enough of kind of a storm, in the regulatory space, that they've had to deal with. The regulators have had to deal with this and figure out, how can we make this work? And
Mhm.
then you have the benefit of coming in now, where that's already been worked out a bit, and now you can kind of say, okay, now we're going to nest in here, and this is our space, this is our little, section of the market that we're going to go for. And
Yeah.
so it is, I mean, so it's like a blessing and a curse all together at the same time. I mean, the more, practices that they do that are unethical, it kind of taints the entire industry. However, they also have navigated some things and taken, some bullets, early in the war, that you may benefit from, as you guys have entered this. So I'm interested. I noticed the Bloomberg interview that we were talking about earlier. You mentioned specifically, like businesses that were founded and run by women, that
Yes.
they may have more difficulty obtaining financing, or, walk us through that space a little bit. And is that a specific focus of Bromley?
Yes, it is. So that was, I mean, obviously being a young female founder in a male dominated industry, I was always concerned with the issue. But I think my interest really grew when Bromley started operating, because I think that's where I witnessed the discrepancy firsthand. It became very apparent quite early on that female founders were just simply not putting themselves out there when it came to applying for debt funding. And we had dozens of cases where female founders would complete like 90% of the application process and then just completely drop off the radar. And that's why we founded Bromley's Female Founders Program, to try and sort of get them over the line, I guess, and just really increase the investment into female founded businesses. Because the female funding, the funding gap for women in Australia is incredibly significant. And just looking at the statistics, I mean, it's things like, I think off the top of my head, like 34% of companies are run by women, and in 20 years, this statistics only increased by 3%.
Wow.
So I read the other day that 1 in 5 Australian VC deals backed a team with at least one female founder. So, the funding gap is really is present, it's significant, and the figures have remained effectively static over the last decade. So, again, it was sort of one of those things. I mean, I think there are so many entrepreneurs that would be able to empathize with this. You have an idea of what your business is going to be, and then like literally 2 seconds in, it completely, not completely changes, but you get a whole lot of new focuses. And that's definitely what happened in the case of female founders. Like, as I said, always something I was concerned with. And I worked startups that I worked with prior to Bromley were in the tech space. So I was very familiar with, being the only woman in the room, especially like tech startup world. It was, I was quite regularly one of few women. So I was definitely familiar with it. But then when Bromley started operating, it was like firsthand, like, why do we have no female founders on the books? Like it became really obvious. And that's when we sort of, well, not pivoted, but really decided to do everything we could to put a bit of bring female founders into the limelight, I guess.
That's surprising in the e-commerce space to me, that there's such a discrepancy, because I would think that if you look at e-commerce stores across the globe, that has a high percentage of female owned e-commerce
Yeah.
stores. So why was there such a discrepancy in the financing versus in the founding, or is there?
Um, I mean, I'm really just more familiar with the Australian scope, I guess,
Hmm.
and it's definitely the sort of the funding that females receive is definitely an issue in Australia. I would say it's not. It's not restricted to the e-commerce industry for sure. Like
Right.
it's female founders across the board,
Yeah.
definitely across the board. And when I talk about my experience being one of the few females, I was sort of working in tech e-commerces, which is very techy, and that there's not a huge female representation in that particular e-commerce sector. But yes, like you are right, there's definitely really amazing female founders all over the globe in the e-commerce space. But when we first started getting things off the ground, now I would say that our portfolio is far more developed. We are heavily sort of focused in the e-commerce space, but it was those really early days when we had a real range of industries and sectors and small businesses, and that's sort of where it became apparent. And again with Bromley, we love the e-commerce sector. That's like what our technology was built to do. That's sort of where my background was as well. But from the outset, it was very much just like, we want to help all small businesses. So it was
across the globe.
Yeah, everyone wants funding.
Hey, it's hard to be exclusive when you start. So that's
so that's kind of what it was. Like, we weren't exclusive from the start.
We'll take anybody, anytime, any place. That's right. We got to pay the light bill here somehow. So.
But it was more just learning from such a wide variety of industries and sectors and founders as well. I think so. It was basically so I think if you're looking like narrowly into e-commerce particular, this funding gap probably isn't as bad. But then more broadly, and then obviously you have to distinguish as well the difference between businesses being founded and businesses being backed.
Right. It's good distinction.
Because I would agree. I would say that in terms of stats of female entrepreneurs, like there's a whole bunch who had the gumption and are doing amazing things and creating businesses. But then when you look further down the line at sort of, maybe the 10-ish year old mark of businesses, sort of being 10 years old, when they're perhaps looking for VC funding, like that's where you see the discrepancy, where you're like, there's the amount of VC backed female founded businesses is really, really, like, the discrepancy is huge. And so that gap's like, okay, well, what happens between business when females start the business, and then how do they get to the place where they get VC funding? It's things like debt funding which get them there. Like, they need to be able to do those small expansions before they can go to the big guys and get that huge equity.
Right.
So that's kind of where, and because I think that there is a lot of focus on like the VC sort of end, like when they get to that stage, like, oh, why aren't females getting VC funded, which is like, that's 100% the issue. Definitely right. But then in order to get there, like we need to somehow stop them from dropping off the radar and help them build to get to that point where they can walk into a boardroom. And it's things like affordable, sustainable funding, which doesn't require a whole lot of physical collateral, which is going to get them there. And physical collateral is really important because it's, especially with female founders, the majority of female entrepreneurs are that sort of 35 to 45 age bracket, where it's usually a working mom who has sort of had a time in corporate or wherever, and is now trying to juggle family life and entrepreneur, and trying to sort of create a business lifestyle which sort of works with family. And that's often where a whole lot of entrepreneurs are coming from. So things like physical collateral, like, you're not going to want to do that like when you're in that stage of your life.
Right.
So it's really important to be able to support these young businesses in a supportive way, that they're able to access.
I mean, are you structured in such a way that sometimes you do have collateral on loans that's physical, and sometimes also it's just a flat rate? It's almost like a character loan. Like, I would a lay person would say that, but somebody that like me, that does not understand the space, would say it's more based on the individual than it is based on any physical, backing. So
there's absolutely, we only do unsecured loans, and they're short-term loans, so they're between sort of 3 and 24 months. They're sort of between like $3 and sort of $250,000 loans. So it's very much sort of working capital focused. And we do rolling interest free loans as well. And that's really, really cool, because those ones are sort of the more when you're working with a client for like 3 years or something. And they're really cool because, in the startup space, things change so quickly and so dramatically. So you have a client for 12, 24, months or whatever, and the changes that you see it's really cool to be a part of that. But yes, we only do unsecured loans, and they are short-term, small business loans.
So I'm interested in the community that's you're kind of building around Bromleigh Capital. I mean, it sounds like to me, I mean, your face kind of lights up when you start talking about your clientele and talking about because I can just see, I can see you running through the portfolio of loans in your mind, and you have faces and you have names and they have families and they have stories. And how are you kind of capitalizing on that? Just kind of the story aspect, or the community aspect of Bromley. I mean, are you celebrating each other within the community, or how's
Yeah,
that?
it's certainly something which I really want to work more on when I finally get home. Is the the community aspect of it.
I do this little MBA thing.
Do that on the side when that's done. So one thing which I would love to do in the future is just spend a whole lot more time and resources on connecting our clients with each other. But yes, it's 100% my favorite part of the job, is interacting with our clients. And a lot of people, it sounds bad, but a lot of people are like, oh, you started fintech, so you're really into fintechs and finance, like that's your thing. And I'm like, no, that's not my thing at all. That's not why I started this at all. It's just, I saw a gap in the market, and that's sort of why it happened. But working with the clients is absolutely my favorite part of it. And yeah, I spend way too much time talking to them like all the time. But
I don't think that's ever wasted.
No, I think that's 100% true. And it was definitely another thing which I completely underestimated was the reward that I get, the personal and social reward from all of that. But yes, building the community more broadly is something which I really want to do more work on in the future. And also just broadening our services in the sense that I'd like to sort of provide like a plethora of sort of business mentoring services, so to speak. We have our young entrepreneurs and female founders program where we do free one-on-one consulting to sort of get them over the line in terms of applying and obtaining debt financing. But I just think there's huge scope for that, because I think and Australia in particular, it just has a really great sort of young entrepreneurial culture, which
very much so.
Yes, which is really, really cool to work in. And it was one thing which I was really surprised. Well, not really surprised. Well, yeah, a little bit. I guess it was just a big, not, I don't want to say big change. It's going to make PwC sound bad. But going from corporate to startup, I remember being so like, wow, like people really want to help each other. Like the startups really want to help each other, and they just love getting involved and hearing about other people's stories. And I think it's because entrepreneurs just put so much of themselves on the line. So, it's something that you can relate to. But, and it's the first piece of advice which I give young other entrepreneurs who ask is just always ask for help. But yeah, I think that culture of people, of entrepreneurs just, really wanting to help and get involved and be, support other entrepreneurs in any way possible. It's something which really I'd love to capitalize on and spend more time working on in the future, because I think it's just, I think it's pretty special to the startup world, in particular in Australia and Melbourne as well, because I think Australia is obviously relatively underdeveloped sort of compared to the other countries, I guess, and in particular fintech industry as well. So it's very cool to be a part of.
I have this theory. I've actually interviewed a number of people from Australia in the last, say, 12 to 18 months. And my theory is that, I look at places like the States and Australia. I think there's some real similarities because, to have originally left England, and that it took almost an entrepreneurial drive to go and start something new somewhere new. And I think that it's almost built in our DNA. I mean, it's a really unique just culture, and just to watch and to interview people, because the stories are so similar. And then you talk to people from other countries that may not have that same. They're much more, akin to just, this is my career.
Yeah.
I'm not starting this. I don't have a startup mentality. I don't, it's not a very entrepreneurial culture. And
Yes.
it just really is interesting to see that, and just on different pockets around the world. And I think you're exactly right. Absolutely right. So I do think that also would differentiate you a little bit from just because it personalizes fintech.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah.
which is a very it's almost a sterile, you hear that word and you're thinking
Yeah.
something clinical, it's
Yeah. You
very
just sort of think,
statistical. It's just data, it's just numbers,
yeah, it's intense.
but the whole idea of just talking about the stories behind, the people behind the loans, or in front of the
Yeah.
loans, I guess, it's really interesting. So walk us through, just for our listeners' sake, the difference between, say, equity and debt, from a standpoint of, like, you do not take any equity. I mean, these are obviously short unsecured loans. There's no like, okay, for this interest rate, we also are going to take 5% of your company type thing. I mean, that's not your business model at all.
No, no, not at all. Is the question why not? Or
No, I'm curious. I mean, is that because that there are a lot of investors that are, early stage investors that they may be a kind of a combination there of, might be a
yeah,
line of credit, might be a loan, might be, we're going to take some equity, that type of thing. And did you ever consider that
no.
because of the space you're in, the on the founder space?
Yeah, no, we never considered that, not for a second. Um, I mean, there is we I mean, the cool thing about working with young small businesses is it does expose you to just the most amazing ideas and business owners. So there's always scope for that. And because we do build great relationships with our clients, it's,
Hmm.
yeah, as I say, it's always scope in the conversation for that sort of long term. But no, it was never something which we considered, because that wasn't where the gap was. And
Yeah.
like there is, applying for equity funding in Australia, like it's there, like people know what to do. But I like, why apply for equity if you don't have to? Like, why get equity funding if you don't have to? And so many small businesses and so many business owners are forced to go down that route and, dilute, founder control. And it completely changes the structure and the operation of the business. And that's no one's fault. Like, that's just how it works. That's just how equity funding works. The VCs have a long-term invested interest, so
Right.
it completely changes how things are run. So it's a very different tact, a very different type of funding, and it's a long-term thing most of the time. And yeah, as I say, that's not where the gap was. The gap was for really, young businesses who really just started up, 6 to 12 months. It was a lot of the time, they would struggle to access equity in the first place, at all. So it was never something which we considered, because that's not really what the need was for. And as a young sort of small business owner myself, I totally understand, like, business, why would you want to give away equity if you don't have to?
Right.
Like build it up as much as you can until it's in the best interests of the company. And also, until you get to the stage where your operations, your systems, your company values and structures are really sort of in place and really solid. Because whenever equity funding comes in, sort of like, it's inevitable that the business dynamics change.
For sure.
um, right. So, and that's as I say, it's no one's fault. Like, that's just natural, that's how it happens. But I think it's best to sort of, when you want to do equity, to make sure that I guess it sounds a bit cliche, but the identity of your business and your profile and your brand and all that stuff is really established. So as an owner and a founder, you know what you stand for, how your operations work, how your systems work, and what you're willing to bend and not bend on, right? And early on, when you're starting up, like, you're just trying to get from A to B. You're just
Hmm.
trying to get money in and out of
Yep.
the door,
Yep.
which is why, like, that's where the need is for. It's that day-to-day operations,
Hmm.
working capital. And that's where the gap was. It's getting from opening the doors to the stage where you can have serious, in-depth conversations with equity lenders. And when you're there, you want to have leeway and flexibility to sort of do it on your terms as well,
Yep.
to make
Yep.
sure that's the best thing for the business. Does that sort of answer the question? Because I feel like
Absolutely.
I went off in a
Absolutely. No, I absolutely. And I really appreciate the way you kind of unpack that, and just because I think you really clearly identified the the space on their entrepreneurial timeline as well, and what their need is, short term type things. So
Yeah.
so businesses have a high rate of default. You start new business startups have a higher, within the first 5 years, have a very high, I hate to use the word failure rate, but in essence, that's exactly what it is. And so do you see the default rate commensurate with that on loans, or is it because yours are such short-term loans and you do your due diligence and that you keep a really low default rate? Or I guess, how does that compare to, say, auto financing or home financing, or as far as the default rate is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short-term aspect is, exactly what you said, because most of our loans are short-term. A lot of the time it's just we're not involved in like the full-blown long-term scale of the business. We do have many clients who are return customers, and we just do, when one loan finishes, they'll just go into the next one. And as I said, that part's really cool because we're part of the journey sort of long-term. But a lot of the time, we're short-term focused, and the main thing that we're looking at is cash and liquidity. So it's not so much like, oh, is this business scalable for the next 20 years? And it's not really about that. It's more so, do they have the capacity to service a loan for the next 12 months? What's their cash look like? And that's what dictates the default rate. So in terms of failure rates, there's definitely a correlation for sure with default rates and business failure rates. But luckily I haven't had much experience or firsthand experience of having a business just completely fold and fail on me, because that's just not sort of the area which we're in. And a lot of the time our businesses are quite young, and they are very nimble, and it's something which the pandemic has done a great job of of highlighting. I wouldn't really say I have enough experience to talk on business failure rates per se, because I do think there's definitely a distinction between sort of failure rates and default rates.
All right. I literally could continue to ask questions. I mean, you would probably miss classes, or
No. I submitted my big assignment a matter of hours ago, so I'm free as a bird.
Free for the weekend. So
I am.
Identify your ideal client. Who is the ideal avatar for Bromleigh Capital?
Oh, that's so hard.
Maybe be as specific as you want to be.
I don't really, to be honest, I don't really want to say an ideal one, because the one thing I love about our business is that we do get this like really cool diversity of owners. I mean, some of my favorites. I know you, I feel like a teacher. I know you're not meant to have favorites, but I I do have some favorites. I guess it's just the businesses that are working in industries and trying to solve really, really cool problems. And we have my favorites when I think about them are really, really diverse. So we have this one company which has been running for quite some time. Actually, it's not a young business, and they provide at-home pastoral care, aged home pastoral care in rural parts of Australia, which I think is really, really special, and obviously has such a great impact on the community. It's very, very community minded. That's one of my favorites. I have another one which is all about mentoring female founders and business owners, and providing basically a whole lot of consulting services around in that whole space, which is obviously very, very cool, something which I can relate to. I'm a massive foodie, so one of our companies has this really cool like Japanese fusion restaurant which I go to all the time and walk in being like, oh no, I know the owners, it's okay.
That's right. This is my table over here in the corner. Right.
Yeah, pretty much, which is really cool. I guess answering the question, like, it's hard to say that without putting your personal side of things in there. From like a purely objective, like what is Bromley's ideal client? E-commerce for sure, like it's a booming industry. There's so much opportunity. to come up with really innovative, not come up with, develop and build innovative risk assessment tools there. And it's more reliable and accurate in that way as well, as opposed to sort of a traditional bricks and mortar type business where it's a little bit riskier in terms of, well, not riskier, I'd say a little bit more opaque maybe when it comes to risk assessment. Whereas e-commerce businesses, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to get really, really accurate risk assessment procedures there. So yeah, ideal, I would say e-commerce. I'm going to say having a female founder because we need more of them. And I always love having gal pal chats at work. So female founder, e-commerce, something obvious. I love being involved in young businesses. There's something just so exciting about being involved. We have many clients who've been operating for like 25 years, but there's always something really exciting because, as I said earlier, things just move so quickly. In those early stages. So, like sometimes I have conversations, I wouldn't speak to a client for a couple months, and then I do, I'm like, oh my God, wait, what do you mean you've like totally branched out over here? Like, and that happens in like 2 months. And those often the young ones are the ones where there's real scaling opportunity as well. So yeah, I would say if I had to be really objective about it, I guess that would probably be Bromley's ideal client. Yeah.
I think that was a very diplomatic way to handle that question. you, teachers across the planet would be proud of your answer. That's it. That's exactly right. So tell me, how has COVID affected Bromley, or has there been have you seen an adverse effect, or has it been an uptick, or has it been kind of steady as you go? I mean, how would you describe the last 12 months?
Again, I feel like a bit of a teacher here. Like, I'm really proud of lots of our clients. We've had very few who've requested holiday periods. So many of them are just doing really, really well. As I say, we have a conservative sort of risk assessment approach. So we were we knew all of our clients' businesses models really well, and it was certainly there was like a lot of conversations, like personal conversations throughout, and it's I would say it's brought us closer together because we're struggling, you're struggling, and it's all right. We know you, and so many business clients would be like freaking out and like, I promise, we're doing our best. I'm like, it's okay. Like, we have an established personal relationship. We know you're not just going to disappear. But I think looking at the industry in general, about with COVID, I think one of the things which has really stood out for me with the pandemic is just the importance of adaptability. I think some businesses have been really effective and have been able to adapt and respond to the challenges of the coronaviruses in really, really cool ways. It's usually the newer, younger businesses which seem to be more resilient than the traditional sort of older, as I said before, bricks and mortar type businesses. And as a result, they're doing sort of a lot better than those. It's sort of the lean online business models which are doing really well. And we have at Bromley seen many clients who have increased their facilities to expand and make the most of the extraordinary circumstances. Right. And it's because they're adapting to the changing habits and rules faster than most businesses. So I would say reflecting on the industry in general. Because Australia does have such a great culture of young entrepreneurial businesses, I think that if young entrepreneurs continue to be dynamic and disruptive and adaptive, we will continue to see lots of up and coming great new businesses. I guess my concern is not so much whether the pandemic will affect the appetite of young entrepreneurs and their willingness to put themselves out there, but more so, will they have the proper support? And more specifically, will they have the accessible and affordable debt funding available? That would be my concern.
I think that was a shameless plug here at the end of the for Bromley. I think it was perfectly timed. I mean,
exactly. That was not the intention at all. That was so
I love it. I love it. It was, and I mean, it's perfect. It fit exactly in your answer, and that is the result of COVID, and that is the kind of the outcome, one of the outcomes of difficult time. I mean, someone like Amazon is going, COVID has been a tremendous blessing to us. I
Yeah.
mean, our
Yeah.
business has just exploded,
Oh,
because of
yeah.
COVID. So
Probably my
it's been,
favorite thing about the UK, like living in Australia. I remember my first couple of weeks here, I was like, Mum, get a load of Amazon. It's amazing.
delivered today. I ordered it this
Today.
morning. This afternoon, I had it in my
Yeah, I
hand.
know.
It's
And I'm like, and it's not just stuff. I'm like, I got a belt yesterday. Like,
that's exactly right. I don't have to leave my flat. They just come right to me. So
yeah, I'm still getting over the Amazon novelty.
exactly.
But yes, yeah, you're right. There have been certain industries where COVID has, been a blessing, and obviously it's been detrimental to so many as well. But yeah, as I say, it's the adaptability, the need to be really nimble,
Mm,
and I think it's something which I was reflecting on the other day when I was in school. We're talking about how I think investor, like sort of the boardrooms or investor conversations, are going to change in the future. When young businesses are pitching, I think there's going to be a whole lot more focus on what is your disaster plan,
yeah.
because it was just never part of, like, I've seen so many pitch books, I've done all the pitching myself, I know those decks inside out, and it's never been an issue before, and it's never been a conversation that people have had. But I think it's going to be definitely a what's going to happen if we need to turn the lights off for like 12 months.
Mm,
um
that's right. And send everyone home.
yeah, yeah, because it's just things that you just don't even think about. Like,
Mm,
I would say another one of my favorites, my favorite clients is a company that, it's actually a really sweet story. A company that I worked for when I first left PwC. So I worked there at their operational role, and they were really young at the time, just starting out. They're in the FMCG industry, so they do. I'll just do a shameless plug. They're called Deliciou, and they do really cool flavored like food seasonings, so like bacon seasoning, spices and stuff like that. And so I was one of their first full-time employees, and worked with them for a while before moving to another startup. And then what must have been maybe 2 years, maybe not even, later, they became a client of mine. And now we've been supporting them with debt financing, and they've moved into Whole Foods now. They're like
mm,
totally expanded to the US. They're doing plant-based chicken products. So again, that's a really, really cool journey story. But the reason I mentioned it is because when pandemic first came out, it was things like, planes aren't going, so we can't like ship our products to the US, and like half our markets in the US. And it's just like conceptually the weirdest thing. And
yep.
especially as a young entrepreneur, you do everything you can to like scenario plan everything, but like you just can't
Yeah,
move
that was not something
in
on
a
our
world
radar.
where like planes don't fly. So like it just
What do you mean planes don't fly?
I guess is what I mean.
That's why
Like,
they're built. They're built to fly.
yeah, it was just like conceptually the weirdest thing. And at the same time, I remember kind of when I was speaking to this founder, and he was just saying that a certain percentage of his products go on commercial planes, like when civilian, like go in like the boot of the plane or whatever, when civilians are flying from one city to another. And I remember being on the phone like, really? Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. And I was like, no, this is serious. I was like, sorry, okay, yeah, serious. Back to the problem.
Back to business.
uh, Back to the problem of planes not flying. But
Exactly.
yeah, it just, as I say, it's unearthed. I think as a result, um, long term, once we get out of it, I think businesses are going to have so much more focus on being really nimble and
Mm,
adaptive
yeah.
and being dynamic. And I think it'll be a conversation which will have a lot more focus in the sort of the investment space long term.
I could not agree more, and it has been such a unique time, globally for
Yeah.
not just businesses but just people in general. Just I mean, and the UK has experienced some, incredible lockdown periods. I mean, lockdown, times.
Oh
So,
yeah.
you've kind of walked through that, but we've covered so much ground in our, the last few minutes that we had to chat. Is there anything that I have not asked you about that you just kind of want to wrap up with? And then just tell people where the best place to find you and find out about Bromley Capital.
I don't think there's anything that you missed. I mean, you touched on all my favorite things. So I don't think there's anything burning. I guess, I would always just encourage people to put themselves out there. And that comes from someone who is naturally super risk averse. And like, I would never would have done it. Actually, this sounds really sort of negative, but I guess what sort of really encouraged me off the bat is, what encouraged me at the end of the day was the fact that I'd spent time in the startup space beforehand, because it was kind of like, well, if these guys are doing it, then I can do it too. And I think it was, if I hadn't seen that firsthand, I definitely wouldn't have done it myself.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm just really lucky that I got that exposure and I could see it. Whereas, so many other, like the majority of entrepreneurs aren't living in that world before they start their business. So it is really hard to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
And I can definitely empathize with what it feels like and what it continues to feel like, by the way. I feel like it's kind of what people say when people have a baby, like the worrying doesn't stop, the stressing never stops. It continues. So just get used to that. But I guess, closing comments, I would say, just continue to back yourself. And I think despite, the world imploding, there will be a really good, decent amount of support for young entrepreneurs trying to kickstart something off. So I would say just don't be scared about that. In terms of places to find us, our website probably, we're on we're on LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff. But website's probably the easiest place to go. It's just bromley.com.au. And as I say, we have conversations with everyone that comes through our doors. So we have no, we only cater to this profile or this market or this size or this revenue, like whatever. We have conversations with absolutely everybody. As I say, I've worked in space for several years. I love the startup space, small business space. So very happy to chat at any point in time.
This is, I think we maybe covered this, but I don't have a good answer for my own question. But are you limited only to Australia, or can you do debt financing globally?
Not yet. That's future lives.
Yeah. 2.0.
No. So just at the moment, just nationally in Australia. But all over Australia. As I say, it's one of my favorite things. I learned things about my own country, which I didn't know myself. But so we're a national debt funding, but no international funds as of yet. That will be later down the track. But at the moment, I do love how Bromley does. It is very community focused,
right.
I would say. And the other thing is, I know. But sometimes when I describe my business to people not in the industry, they're like, "Oh, so like you're basically a loan shark," and I'm like, "No."
No, but we work with some.
So I know sometimes it sounds like, "Oh yes, we have this big loan portfolio," but actually at the end of the day, Bromley itself is a young, small family business. So I like the community's focus that we have at this stage in our journey. Hopefully, we'll scale and grow over time. But at the moment, I really enjoy working with Australian businesses across the entire country, which is pretty big.
Yep. And pretty diverse, for sure.
Very, very, very diverse. It's a very diverse country with a diverse range of amazing business owners, for sure.
Well, Olivia, it has been a true pleasure to chat with you today. And I thank you for taking all this time and just continue to ask the questions that I just continued to ask you over and over and over again. But it has been a delightful conversation, and I actually have been very educational as well. So it's been great to carve out a little space in your busy schedule. And I know that you've got a lot of people that are kind of pulling at your schedule, and just want to thank you again for
it was a real treat.
Really treat. Well, thank you for being here.
I deliberately scheduled it a few hours after my assessment due date, so I had something to look forward to.
That was wise, and no interruptions. Nobody walked through your dorm door during the interview, so we were good. That's right. With the entire hour and didn't have interruptions. But I do want to just thank you again for just taking time and just helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Olivia, have a great weekend.
Thank you so much. You too.
Another episode in the books. We hope you heard some great takeaways. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on iTunes and YouTube. As always, thanks for listening to Rising Tide.